In the city of Himeji, Japan, stands a tall and beautiful castle overlooking the city. Built in the 14th century, Shirasagi, or Egret Castle, is known as Japan's finest castle. Its beautiful white facade is home to a rich history and many legends. One of them is that of Okiku, a servant girl murdered and said to still be residing on the castle grounds. When night falls, the tormented spirit of Okiku is said to be heard counting and crying from the bottom of a well. Okiku's well. Supernatural Japan, Episode 5. The Ghost in the Well. Okiku's Well. Well, hello there. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I'm a Canadian who lived in Japan for quite some time. I am your host, the host of the Supernatural Japan podcast, and I'm a person who really enjoys a good spooky tale, a tale that's a bit odd. I like to learn about historical places that have some quirky pasts and twists. Now, I like to learn these things about places all around the world, especially in Japan. And I'm really happy you are able to join us. If you're new to the podcast, thank you so much for joining us. If you've been with us for a few episodes, thanks for continuing the ride. Well, let's get into episode 5 of the Supernatural Japan podcast. So in this week's episode, I get a lot of information from, well, Wikipedia, a website called remotelands.com, and from my own research. So from different photographs I took while visiting Himeji Castle of some different information plaques and displays that talked about this famous tale. So, Bansho Sarayashiki, or the Dish Mansion at Bansho, is a Japanese ghost story of a broken trust and broken promises leading to a dismal fate, according to the write-up at Wikipedia. Alternatively referred to as the Sarayashiki manner of dishes tradition, all versions of the tale revolve around a servant who dies unjustly and returns to haunt the living. Now tonight I'm going to share the version of Bansho Sarayashiki that is set in Himeji, Japan, and more specifically, Himeji Castle. Now this version calls to me since I have been to Himeji Castle in person many times, and most recently took lots of photos and videos of Okiku's well while I was at the castle. It was almost as if I seemed to know that in a couple of years after taking these videos and photos that I would be making a podcast about the topic. So of course, for me, castles are places that really do speak to me. So many things have happened in them, and they've got so many amazing stories attached to them, and such deep histories. Battles fought, lives lost, affairs and intrigue inside the walls. If there were places fit for hauntings and spirits, they would certainly be Japanese castles. Now first, a little about Himeji Castle. And this is from a website called remotelands.com, and it's from a travelogue post. It was built for war, became haunted by vengeful ghosts, is protected by magic ceramic tiles, and boasts a military history maze to confuse invaders. Myth, superstition, bloodshed, and glory reverberate through the 83 buildings of the biggest and most revered castle in Japan. Today, the tourist attraction outside of Kobe, in the city of Himeji, this hilltop fortress has a dark and strange story. For 400 years, the imposing white facade of Himeji Castle has been an icon of Japan. It is described by UNESCO as the finest surviving example of early 17th century Japanese castle architecture. To preserve it for future generations, it recently underwent a 5-year, $23 million restoration project. After decades of weathering and discoloration, its walls are once more a brilliant white, which was the color that earned the complex its alternative moniker, the White Heron Castle, after the graceful water bird. It is also, like I mentioned earlier, called the Shirasagi or Egret Castle, And the egret, well, I am a birder, the egret is essentially a more solid white cousin of the heron. With a multi-story tower at its core, the castle was built with sophisticated defense systems. Ringed by moats and protected by gates, baileys, ramparts, and turrets, its most innovative security mechanism was the maze-like path to the main tower. This ensured that invading forces would be herded in a spiral direction around the castle, encountering dead ends and being left vulnerable to assaults from above during their slow progression to the tower. While the castle's clever design offered it generous protection, these defensive elements never were tested in combat. Over almost 3 centuries that it operated as the hub of a feudal domain, it was never assaulted. The castle, which sold at public auction in 1871 when feudal society was abolished, remarkably suffered only minor damage during extensive bombings of Himeji at the end of World War II in 1945. Now here is the traditional folk story of Okiku, and this is from Wikipedia. Once there was a beautiful servant named Okiku. She worked for a samurai, Aoyama Teisan. Okiku often refused him when he said he was in love with her and wanted to marry her, so he tricked her into believing that she had carelessly lost one of the family's 10 precious plates. Such a crime would normally result in her death. In a frenzy, she counted and recounted the 9 plates many times. However, she could not find the 10th and went to Aoyama in guilty tears. The samurai offered to overlook the matter if she finally became his lover, but again, she refused. Enraged, Aoyama threw her down a well to her death. It is said that Okiku became a vengeful spirit who tormented her murderer by counting to 9 and then making a terrible shriek to represent the missing 10th plate. Or perhaps she had tormented herself and was still trying to find the 10th plate, but cried out in agony when she never could. In some versions of the story, this torment continued until an exorcist or neighbor shouted 10 in a loud voice to the end of her count. Her ghost, finally relieved that someone had found the plate for her, haunted the samurai no more. And again, that is a traditional folktale of Okiku at Himeji Castle. Now what I'm going to read to you is actually from a photograph of a plaque that I took a picture of outside of Okiku's well on the Himeji Castle grounds back in 2020, the last time I visited the castle with my wife and my 2 children. So this is a place that my wife said she had gone on many times on school trips as a child. She is from the Kansai region of Japan, and when we went there in 2020, we took our kids there for the first time, although I had visited on my own and with my own parents and my wife on several other occasions. So this is, again, from a plaque that is posted on a display just near Okiku's well itself. And pardon my Japanese pronunciation as I read this. Okiku, Ido, is said to be the well that features the ghost story known as Banshu Sarayashiki. Around the year 1500, Aoyama Tetsuzan, the regent of the Lord of Himeji Castle, Kodera Norimoto, plotted with Chono Tsubo Danshiro to kill Norimoto and take over the castle. Norimoto's loyal retainer, Kinugasa Motonobu, arranged for Okiku to serve as a maid in the Aoyama's house to ascertain his plans. Having learned of the would-be assassin's plot to kill Norimoto, Okiku passed on the word to Motonobu. This allowed Norimoto to escape death by fleeing to the island of Ieshima, Himeji City, but Tetsuzan seized control of the castle. After learning of Okiku's actions, Danshiro forced her into marriage in exchange for sparing her life. But yearning for Motonobu, Okiku turned Danshiro down. Unable to bear Okiku's rejection, Danshiro hid one of 10 plates that were treasured possessions of the Aoyama family and framed Okiku for the theft. Nevertheless, Okiku still failed to accept his advances. So Denshiro slew her and threw her body down a well. Legend tells that ever since, the voice of Okiku, counting the 9 remaining plates over and over again, could be heard coming from this well. 1 plate, 2 plates, 3 plates. Motonobu and his companions eventually destroyed Tetsuzan and his conspirators, and Okiku was enshrined in Junisho Shrine as Okiku Daimyojin. And that is the direct text from historical plate display outside of Okiku's well. Now, whether you believe this tale is true or not, it still remains a great story. I personally have visited this castle in the daytime like any other regular visitor, because that's what I was when I visited, a regular visitor, but I would love to have a chance to visit this place at night. Now, I've had some strange experiences at some historical reconstructions in Canada, some places that had hundreds of years of history, and I would love to visit historical places in a place like Japan, especially Himeji Castle at night as well, to compare my experiences, because I'm sure there would be some cool ones indeed. Now, here's some questions I have for you fine folks out there listening to the Supernatural Japan podcast. Have you been to Himeji Castle or any other Japanese castles in the past? What did you think of them? Did you read any traditional haunted tales about these places? We'd love to hear about them over at the Supernatural Japan Facebook group. So go on over there, and also please share on Instagram. Leave a comment. There's going to be a lot of pictures of Okiku's well, Himeji Castle, that I took, my own personal photographs, as well as a little video blog that I will be posting both on the Supernatural Japan Facebook group and the Supernatural Japan Instagram feed. I'll be posting them there, and I think I'll post them on my Twitter as well. So, all of you out there, thank you so much for listening to episode number 5 of the podcast. It's a short one, but a good one. The Ghost in the Well, Okiku's Well. And this is a typical top 10 list story for spooky Japan things. And I've talked about in the past with some different people how I want to try to avoid kind of top 10 list places in Japan when it comes to spooky haunted things. But this is one that I wanted to share simply because I've been to this location several times. I've stood over Okiku's Well and I've looked down into the well. Mind you, all in the daytime. So go over to the Facebook group and go over to our Instagram to see photos I took, of course, and check them out. I think they're pretty darn cool. Now, please take the time, of course, to rate and review the Supernatural podcast wherever you listen to it. That helps us get noticed. It helps us get posted and displayed by Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and gets more ears on the podcast. Help us grow. Share us on your social media as well. Share us on your Facebook page yourself, like your Facebook, or with people that you know who have an interest in Japan. And go check out our Facebook group over at facebook.com/groups/supernaturaljapan, instagram.com/supernaturaljapan, and you can follow me on Twitter at Mad4Maple. Those are all places where you can find us. Thank you so much for checking out episode 5 of the Supernatural Japan podcast. Stay tuned. Next week we'll be coming to you with another spooky tale of cool things in Japan. And so wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy, you're healthy, you're safe, and I'll be talking to you in a week.